I'm Renee, 32, and my life changed forever when my parents abandoned me at a train station as a joke when I was 12. What should have been a harmless family trip became the day I realized my family wasn't safe. The casual cruelty of leaving a child alone just to teach a lesson shattered something inside me that could never be repaired. That day marked the beginning of my journey to freedom, though the scars still linger 2 decades later. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from. If you've ever had to protect yourself from the people who should have protected you, hit subscribe. We survivors need to stick together. Growing up in the tree-lined suburbs of Rochester Hills, Michigan, my life appeared perfectly normal from the outside. Our two-story colonial with the carefully maintained lawn gave no hint of what happened behind closed doors. My father, Thomas Morgan, worked as a successful investment banker, while my mother, Judith, maintained her image as the perfect homemaker and part-time real estate agent. They hosted neighborhood barbecues, attended PTA meetings, and always made sure we were well-dressed for family photos. To everyone else, we were the ideal American family. But inside our home, a different reality existed. My parents believed in teaching lessons through what they called memorable experiences. These weren't normal punishments or consequences. They were calculated scenarios designed to instill fear and obedience through emotional manipulation. When I was 5, I briefly wandered away from my mother at Oakland Mall to look at a toy display. After finding me just minutes later, instead of expressing relief, she decided to teach me a lesson. She hid behind a clothing rack and watched me for nearly 2 hours as I sobbed hysterically, convinced I'd been abandoned forever. Mall security was about to call the police when she finally approached, scolding me in front of the concerned security guard. "See what happens when you don't stay close. Maybe next time you'll listen." By age 8, I had developed the habit of forgetting to close the back door completely. One January evening, when the temperature had dropped below freezing, my father noticed the door slightly ajar. His solution was to make me stand on the back porch without my coat for 45 minutes. "Now you'll appreciate having a home with heat," he said, as my teeth chattered and my fingers turned numb. When I developed a fever the next day, they told me it was the natural consequence of my carelessness. Perhaps the most psychologically damaging incident happened when I was 10. Our family had planned a weekend trip to my aunt's lake house. That morning, I was struggling to find my swimsuit and delayed our departure by 15 minutes. When I finally came downstairs with my packed bag, the house was empty. They had driven away, leaving a note. "Since you couldn't be ready on time, we left without you. The neighbors will check in. Enjoy your weekend alone." I spent hours crying, terrified, until they returned that evening. They never actually went to the lake house. They had simply driven around and had lunch at a restaurant, laughing about how I would finally learn to be punctual. I was 10 years old, left believing I'd spend the entire weekend alone. My younger brother Andrew was 8 when I was 12. The summer everything changed. He was spared from these lessons, being naturally compliant and sensitive to our parents' expectations. They often held him up as the example I should follow. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" became a familiar refrain. This wasn't Andrew's fault. He was just a child navigating the same toxic environment in his own way, trying to stay safe through perfect obedience. As the years passed, my mental health deteriorated. I developed severe anxiety, constantly trying to anticipate what might trigger their next lesson. I became hypervigilant, checking and double-checking everything I did, desperate to avoid giving them any reason to teach me. I had trouble sleeping, stomach aches before school, and found myself apologizing constantly for things that weren't my fault. A teacher once asked if everything was okay at home, but I knew better than to tell the truth. My parents were respected community members who would believe me. That summer I turned 12, my father announced we would take a family trip to Chicago. Despite my anxiety, I felt a flutter of excitement. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe we could be like the families I saw on TV, enjoying new experiences together without the undercurrent of fear. I spent hours researching Chicago attractions, hoping to contribute positively to the trip planning. I was determined to be perfect, to give them no reason for one of their lessons. Little did I know that this trip would become the dividing line of my life, everything that came before and everything that came after. The train station incident remains crystal clear in my memory even 20 years later. Every sound, smell, and feeling is preserved like a terrible museum exhibit I can't escape. Our Chicago trip had actually been pleasant for the first 2 days. We visited the Museum of Science and Industry, took photos at the Bean in Millennium Park, and even laughed together during a boat tour of the Chicago River. I remember feeling cautiously hopeful, thinking perhaps we had turned a corner as a family. Maybe my parents had outgrown their need for those teaching moments. Maybe they finally saw me as worthy of protection rather than punishment. On the third day, we were at Union Station preparing to take an architectural tour. The station buzzed with activity travelers rushing to catch trains, tourists admiring the Grand Hall's ornate ceiling, announcements echoing through the massive space. I remember being fascinated by the energy of it all, so different from our quiet suburban life. "Renee, why don't you go get yourself a magazine for the train ride while we wait?" my father suggested, handing me $10. "We'll be right here by the information desk." Looking back, I should have recognized the familiar glint in his eye, the one that appeared whenever a lesson was brewing. But I was 12 and still desperate for any scrap of normalcy or approval. I took the money and headed to the newsstand, carefully selecting a teen magazine and making sure to get the receipt and correct change. When I returned less than 10 minutes later, they were gone. The spot by the information desk was occupied by strangers. I looked around, assuming they had just moved to a nearby bench or shop. But they weren't anywhere in sight. "They probably went to check the departure board," I told myself, trying to stay calm as I walked to the main schedule display. No sign of them. "Maybe they went to the bathroom," I reasoned, waiting outside the family restroom for several minutes. Still nothing. As 1 hour stretched into two, panic began to rise in my throat. I approached a security guard, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained that I couldn't find my family. "What's your name, sweetie?" the guard asked. "Renee Morgan," I replied, my voice small in the cavernous station. The guard made an announcement over the PA system. "Will the family of Renee Morgan please come to the information desk?" No one came. After 3 hours, I sat huddled on a bench near the security office, trying not to cry as the station staff debated calling Child Protective Services. That's when I overheard a phone conversation that changed everything. A station employee named Grace was speaking on the phone, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "Sir, your daughter is extremely upset. No, this isn't funny. Sir, leaving a child alone in a train station isn't teaching independence, it's endangerment. Yes, I understand you're still in Chicago. No, I cannot just put her on a train by herself." She was talking to my father. This wasn't a mistake or miscommunication. They had left me deliberately. When they finally returned to the station nearly 5 hours later, my mother's first words weren't of concern, but accusation. "You should have seen how worried your brother was about you. He kept asking where you went." My father was more direct. "Well, did you learn something today? This world isn't going to coddle you. You need to learn how to handle yourself in unfamiliar situations." Grace, the station employee who had stayed past her shift to sit with me, looked at my parents with undisguised disgust. "Your daughter handled herself remarkably well, actually. She remained calm, sought appropriate help, and waited safely. What exactly were you hoping she'd learn by abandoning her?" "We didn't abandon her," my mother snapped. "It was a lesson in independence. Everyone's so sensitive these days." The car ride back to our hotel was excruciating. My father seemed pleased with himself, recounting how they had watched from a distance as I searched for them. "You should have seen your face," he laughed. "I told your mother you'd figure it out eventually." My brother Andrew sat beside me in the back seat, confused and uncomfortable. "I wanted to come back sooner," he whispered when our parents were arguing about a wrong turn. "I told them you'd be scared." "It's okay," I whispered back, though nothing was okay. Nothing would ever be okay again. That night in the hotel room, listening to my parents' steady breathing as they slept peacefully after traumatizing their child, I made a decision. This would be the last lesson they would ever teach me. I wouldn't give them the chance to escalate further, to see what other creative ways they could find to break me. I lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling, plotting my escape. The 2 weeks following the train station incident were the most focused of my young life. Each day was a careful balance of appearing normal while secretly preparing for my departure. I couldn't risk my parents suspecting anything. Their lesson would surely become more severe if they caught me planning to leave. First, I needed money. I started saving my lunch money, eating only the free items at school and claiming I wasn't hungry at dinner. I babysit for our neighbors one weekend, hiding the $20 I earned inside the lining of my winter coat. I collected loose change from the laundry and under couch cushions. After 2 weeks, I had scraped together nearly $70, enough for a bus ticket and some food. Next, I researched bus routes. During computer lab at school, I looked up Greyhound schedules from Detroit to Columbus, Ohio, where my grandmother Elaine lived. She was my mother's mother, and while they had a strained relationship, she had always been kind to me during our infrequent visits. More importantly, she lived alone and had once slipped me her phone number, telling me I could call any time. Just in case, she had said with a look that suggested she knew more than she let on about my home life. I memorized the bus schedule and mapped the route from our house to the Detroit bus terminal. It would require taking 2 local buses, but I had occasionally used public transportation for school field trips and felt confident I could navigate the system. Each night, I secretly packed a little more. A change of clothes hidden at the bottom of my backpack, my small jewelry box with the necklace my grandmother had given me, a photo album of happier times, my birth certificate, which I found in my mother's filing cabinet, my school records and vaccination information, which I carefully removed from the family filing cabinet when everyone was asleep, a toothbrush and small toiletries I'd collected from hotel stays. The hardest part was writing a letter to Andrew. He was just 8, too young to understand why I had to leave, too vulnerable to be trusted with my plans beforehand. I wrote and rewrote the letter several times, trying to explain in terms he might understand. Dear Andrew, the final version read, "By the time you read this, I will be somewhere safe. What Mom and Dad did to me at the train station wasn't right. No one should treat people that way, especially not parents. I love you very much, and this isn't your fault. When you're older, maybe we can find each other again. Until then, please know I'm thinking of you. Be brave, but also be safe. Love, Renee." I sealed it in an envelope and hid it in his favorite comic book, knowing he'd find it eventually, but not immediately. The day I left was a Tuesday in July. I had chosen it carefully. Both my parents would be at work all day, and Andrew was at a friend's house for a summer playdate. I waited until 30 minutes after they had all left, watching from my bedroom window as my father's car disappeared around the corner. With shaking hands, I retrieved my backpack from its hiding place in the back of my closet. I took one last look at my room, the floral wallpaper my mother had chosen, the bookshelf full of stories I'd escaped into, the bed where I'd cried myself to sleep so many nights. I felt nothing but relief at leaving it behind. I left through the back door, locking it with my house key, which I then pushed through the mail slot. I wouldn't need it anymore. The journey to the bus station was a blur of anxiety and adrenaline. Every person who glanced my way seemed like a potential threat who might return me to my parents. But no one stopped the quiet 12-year-old girl with the backpack and determined expression. The 7-hour bus ride to Columbus was both terrifying and exhilarating. I had never traveled so far alone. I stared out the window as Michigan gave way to Ohio's suburban landscapes, blending into one another as my old life receded with each mile. When I finally arrived at my grandmother's modest ranch house on the outskirts of Columbus, the sun was setting. I stood on her doorstep for several minutes, suddenly paralyzed with doubt. What if she turned me away? What if she called my parents immediately? What if this escape was just trading one bad situation for another? Finally, I rang the doorbell. Through the screen door, I watched my grandmother approach, her expression changing from casual curiosity to shock. "Renee," she said, pushing open the door. "What on earth are you doing here? Where are your parents?" The story came pouring out of me, not just the train station, but all of it. Years of lessons and fear and walking on eggshells. By the time I finished, we were sitting at her kitchen table, and she had made me a sandwich I was too upset to eat. "They said it was to teach me independence." I finished, my voice hoarse from crying. My grandmother's face had grown increasingly grave as I spoke. When the phone rang, we both jumped. It was my mother, having discovered I wasn't home when she returned from work. "She's run away," I heard my mother say dismissively after my grandmother confirmed I was there. "Just another dramatic episode. We'll come get her this weekend." My grandmother's response surprised me. "No, Judith, you won't," she said firmly. Renee will be staying with me for a while. We can discuss arrangements later. She hung up despite my mother's protests. Turning to me, she said, "You're safe now. We'll figure this out together." That night, I slept without nightmares for the first time in years. In the days that followed, my parents made surprisingly little effort to reclaim me. My father called once telling my grandmother that I would come crawling back when I realized how good I had it. My mother seemed almost relieved to have me gone. They agreed suspiciously easily when my grandmother suggested I stay with her for the rest of the summer. Summer turned to fall, and with my grandmother's help, I enrolled in the local middle school. My parents sent a box with some of my clothes and books, but no letter, no phone call to me directly. It was as if they had simply erased me from their family portrait, unwilling to admit that I had escaped their control, rather than submitting to another lesson. And so began my new life, free from fear, but carrying wounds that would take decades to heal. Living with my grandmother Elaine was like stepping into a different dimension. The constant anxiety that had been my companion gradually began to recede, though it never fully disappeared. For the first few weeks, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for her kindness to reveal itself as another elaborate trap. But it never did. Grandmother had been a school counselor before retirement, and she recognized the signs of trauma in my behavior. Within a month of my arrival, she had arranged for me to see Dr. Sarah Winters, a child psychologist specializing in family trauma. "What your parents did wasn't discipline or teaching," Dr. Winters told me during one of our early sessions. "It was emotional abuse. None of it was your fault, Renee." Those words, "it wasn't your fault," were like water in a desert I hadn't even realized I was crossing. I had spent so many years believing there was something fundamentally wrong with me, something that made me deserve those lessons. My grandmother's home operated on consistency and clear communication concepts foreign to my previous life. If she said dinner would be ready at 6, it was. If she was going to be late, she called. When she was upset about something I did, she simply told me without elaborate punishments or mind games. The predictability was healing in itself. "In this house," she told me one night after tucking me in another new experience at 12, "we talk about problems. We don't teach lessons through fear." School was another adjustment. I enrolled in 7th grade at Lincoln Middle School, terrified of being the new girl, but equally afraid of returning to my old life. To my surprise, I made friends fairly quickly. Without the constant stress at home, I discovered I was actually quite good at connecting with people. Jessica and Mia became my first real friends, inviting me to sleepovers where parents checked in on giggling girls rather than devising ways to traumatize them. My parents' attempts to contact me were sporadic and always manipulative. My mother would call my grandmother's house and ask to speak with me, then spend the entire conversation explaining how I had torn apart the family and how much I had hurt Andrew by leaving. "He cries for you," she would say, though when I eventually got to speak with Andrew directly, he seemed to be adjusting fine. "He thinks you abandoned him, just like you think we abandoned you." My father's approach was different. He simply pretended nothing had happened. His rare calls were filled with surface-level questions about school and comments about the weather, never acknowledging why I had left or whether he wanted me to return. Andrew would sometimes call secretly from a friend's house, our conversations consisting mostly of updates about his school and friends. He was too young to understand the complexity of the situation, but I treasured these glimpses into his life. As months turned into years, my grandmother and I developed routines and traditions that helped heal my fractured sense of family. Sunday pancake breakfasts, Friday movie nights with popcorn, a real birthday celebration with an actual cake and thoughtful gifts, Christmas with a tree we decorated together while listening to carols. Normal things that felt extraordinary to me. Then, during the winter of my sophomore year of high school when I was 17, my grandmother received a diagnosis that changed everything again. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim, 6 months at best. The legal reality of my situation suddenly became urgent. If my grandmother died before I turned 18, I would legally have to return to my parents. After consulting with a lawyer friend, my grandmother helped me file for emancipation, using the detailed records Dr. Winters had kept of my therapy sessions, documenting the emotional abuse. My parents fought it half-heartedly, more concerned with appearances than with actually regaining custody. By the time the judge granted my emancipation, my grandmother's health was deteriorating rapidly. Those final months with her were precious and painful. I took on more household responsibilities, learned to manage finances, and cook proper meals, and spent every moment I could at her bedside. We talked about everything: her life, her regrets, her hopes for my future. "You are stronger than anyone I've ever known, Renee," she told me one evening as I adjusted her pillows. "What happened to you was terrible, but what you've done with it is remarkable. Promise me you'll keep building your own life." I graduated high school 2 months before she passed away. She insisted on attending the ceremony despite her weakness beaming with pride from her wheelchair, as I accepted my diploma and the scholarship to Ohio State University that would be my ticket to independence. When she died in her sleep a few weeks later, I was holding her hand. The depth of my grief surprised me. I had only lived with her for 5 years, yet she had given me a lifetime's worth of love and stability. At 18, I found myself truly alone. But I was not the same frightened 12-year-old who had arrived on her doorstep. I was a young woman with a plan, a future, and the unwavering belief that I deserved better than what my first family had offered. As I packed up my grandmother's house, donating most items and keeping only those with sentimental value, I made another promise to myself: I would build a life so full of love and security that the train station would become just a distant chapter in a much longer, happier story. The 20 years between my escape and the day my past caught up with me were filled with deliberate choices to build the life I wanted rather than the one I had been given. Each decision was a brick in the wall I constructed between my new life and the family that had treated me as disposable. My college years at Ohio State were transformative. I chose to study psychology driven by both my experience with therapy and a desire to understand the dynamics that had shaped my childhood. Campus life provided the freedom to reinvent myself completely. Nobody knew my history unless I chose to share it, which I rarely did. I was simply Renee, the psychology major who volunteered at the campus crisis hotline and made Dean's List consistently. During the first semester of my junior year, I met James in a cognitive psychology class. He was studying to become a special education teacher with a quiet confidence and kindness that drew me to him immediately. Our relationship developed slowly. My trust issues made sure of that, but his patience never wavered. On our 5th date, I told him about my parents and the train station. I had rehearsed a simplified version I usually shared with the few people I trusted, but with James, the full story poured out. When I finished bracing for pity or disbelief, he simply took my hand and said, "Thank you for trusting me enough to share that. They missed out on knowing an incredible person." It was the perfect response: acknowledgement without dramatization, empathy without pity. I knew then that he was someone I could build a future with. After graduation, I began working as a counselor for at-risk youth while pursuing my master's degree in clinical counseling. Working with children who had experienced trauma similar to mine gave purpose to my pain. I could recognize the signs others might miss and connect with these kids in a way my colleagues sometimes couldn't. James and I married when I was 26 in a small ceremony attended by friends who had become our chosen family. By then, I had legally changed my last name to my grandmother's maiden name, Harrison, another step in claiming my own identity. Our first home was a modest 2-bedroom house with a fenced backyard and a kitchen with big windows. Everything my grandmother's house had been for me: a place of safety and consistency. When we found out I was pregnant 2 years later, the nursery became a labor of love, filled with books and soft blankets, and promises that this child would never know the fear I had known. Our daughter Lily was born on a snowy February morning, her arrival healing parts of me I hadn't realized were still broken. Holding her, I made silent promises. You will always know where your parents are. You will never be left alone to learn a lesson. Your mistakes will be met with guidance, not punishment. You will never doubt that you are loved. Throughout these years, I maintained careful boundaries around information about my life. Our phone number was unlisted. My social media accounts were private and under my married name. Professionally, I was Renee Harrison, with no connection to the Morgans of Rochester Hills, Michigan. Occasionally, news about my first family reached me through distant relatives who still kept in touch with my grandmother's sister. My parents divorced when I was 25, apparently unable to maintain their perfect facade once both children had left. My father had remarried quickly to a younger woman and moved to Florida. My mother remained in Michigan, though she had downsized to a condo after selling the family home. Andrew had graduated from Michigan State and moved to California to work in tech. From the sparse updates I received, he seemed to be doing well, though we hadn't spoken since he left for college. I often wondered if he remembered me, if he understood why I had left, if he had realized how abnormal our childhood had been. I had created a network of close friends who became the family I chose. Maria and Daniel, who lived next door and traded babysitting duties with us. Sophia from my graduate program, who understood my professional passion for helping traumatized children. James's brother Michael and his wife Kate, who treated me like the sister they had always known. My 32nd birthday celebration was a small gathering in our backyard. As I watched James grilling while Lily and our friends' children played on the swing set, I felt a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. The scared girl from the train station was now a woman surrounded by genuine love, a mother, a counselor helping other children find their way through trauma. I had not just survived, I had built a life worth living. The past still visited in nightmares occasionally, but it no longer defined me. Or so I thought until the morning everything changed again. Monday mornings in our household followed a comfortable routine. James would get up first to shower while I made breakfast and packed Lily's lunch for kindergarten. We'd eat together, then James would take Lily to school on his way to work while I prepared for my first therapy client at 9. This particular Monday seemed no different as I kissed them goodbye at the door, Lily's dark curls bouncing as she skipped to the car clutching her lunchbox. I refilled my coffee and headed to my home office to review notes before my first session, absently grabbing my phone from the charger. The screen showed 29 missed calls. My heart stuttered. No one called that many times unless something was terribly wrong. My first thought was James and Lily had there been an accident, but the calls hadn't started until after they'd left home. 23 of the calls were from the same unknown number with a California area code. 6 were from another unfamiliar number with a Michigan area code. There were 7 voicemails. With trembling fingers, I pressed play on the first message and heard a male voice I hadn't heard in over 15 years. "Renee, it's Andrew. Your brother Andrew. I know it's been a long time, but I need to talk to you. It's about Dad. Please call me back at this number." The second message time-stamped 20 minutes later. "Renee, it's Andrew again. I understand if you don't want to talk to me, but Dad had a massive heart attack last night. He's in critical condition. The doctors aren't sure he's going to make it. He's been asking for you. Please call me back." The messages became increasingly urgent. "Renee, the doctors say Dad might not make it through the day. I know what they did to you was unforgivable, but please, if there's any part of you that wants closure." "Renee, it's Andrew again. I've been trying to reach you all night. Dad's still hanging on, but it doesn't look good. I found your number through Mom's things. Apparently she's had a private investigator tracking you for years. I'm sorry for that invasion, but I need to reach you now." "Renee, it's Andrew. Dad's been stabilized, but he's still in critical condition. The doctors induced a coma to help his heart recover. Please call me back. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I'm asking anyway." The final message was from a woman with a Michigan accent. "This message is for Renee Morgan. This is Nurse Collins from Beaumont Hospital in Royal Oak, Michigan. I'm calling at the request of Thomas Morgan. Please contact his son Andrew regarding Mr. Morgan's condition. Thank you." I sank into my office chair, my coffee forgotten, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. My carefully constructed life with its safe boundaries and chosen family suddenly felt paper thin. All it had taken was 29 phone calls to bring the past rushing back. My first client would arrive in 40 minutes. I needed to pull myself together, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I canceled my morning appointments, citing a family emergency, words that felt foreign in my mouth after years of having no family but the one I'd created. James called around noon, concerned when he received notification of my canceled appointments. "What's wrong?" he asked, worry evident in his voice. "My father had a heart attack." I said the words sounding surreal. "My brother found me somehow. He's been calling non-stop since last night." "Your brother Andrew." James knew all about my first family, of course. Are you okay? Do you want me to come home? No, I said, though part of me wanted exactly that. I just need some time to think. I'll be fine for your parent-teacher conferences this afternoon. After we hung up, I stared at my phone, Andrew's number glowing on the screen. Should I call back? Did I owe my father anything, even a goodbye? Or would contacting them just reopen wounds that had taken decades to heal? I called Dr. Marshall, my own therapist, whom I still saw monthly as part of my commitment to maintaining my mental health. You don't owe them anything, she said after I explained the situation. But the question is, what do you need? Would seeing your father or speaking with your brother provide some kind of closure, or would it just traumatize you all over again? That was the question I couldn't answer. Part of me wanted to delete the messages and pretend they had never found me. Another part was curious about Andrew's life, about what kind of man my father had become, about whether they ever recognized what they had done. By evening, after James had returned with Lily, and we had gone through our normal dinner and bedtime routines, I had made my decision. I would call Andrew back, not for my father's sake, but for my own, to show myself that I was strong enough to face my past without being consumed by it. After Lily was asleep, James squeezed my hand supportively and gave me privacy in my office. With a deep breath, I dialed Andrew's number. He answered on the first ring. Renee. His voice was deeper than I remembered, but with the same slight hesitation that had characterized him as a child. It's me, I confirmed, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. Thank you for calling back, he said, relief evident. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't, I admitted. It's been a long time, Andrew. 20 years, he said softly. I found your letter the day after you left. I kept it hidden in my desk until I left for college. The mention of the letter, that desperate note I'd written as a 12-year-old, caught me off guard. You kept it. It was the only thing I had left of you, he said. Renee, I need to say something before we talk about Dad. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't protect you. I was just a kid too, but I knew what they were doing wasn't right, and I didn't do anything to stop it. His apology unlocked something in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement. You were 8, Andrew. It wasn't your job to protect me from our parents. Still, he insisted, I've carried that guilt for years. When I had my own kids, it hit me even harder how messed up our childhood was, how what they called teaching lessons was really just cruelty. You have children. The thought of being an aunt to children I'd never met was strange. 2. Jacob is 7 and Emma is 5. He paused. They know they have an Aunt Renee. I've shown them pictures from when we were kids. The conversation shifted to his life, his software engineering career in San Francisco, his wife Laura, their home near the Bay. He told me how he'd started therapy in his 20s after a relationship ended because of his trust issues. That's when I really started understanding what happened to us wasn't normal, he explained. My therapist helped me see that what Mom and Dad did was abuse, plain and simple. Hearing him name it abuse was validating in a way I hadn't expected. I found myself sharing bits of my life too, my work as a therapist, James, Lily. It felt like building a tentative bridge across 2 decades of silence. Finally, we circled back to the reason for his calls. Dad's condition has stabilized, Andrew explained. They're bringing him out of the coma gradually. The doctors think he'll recover, but it was close. He was asking for you before they sedated him. How did you find me? I asked the question that had been nagging at me since I heard his first message. Andrew sighed. That's the other thing I need to tell you. Mom's had a private investigator tracking you for years. When Dad got sick, she gave me a file with your address, phone number, even pictures of you and your family. I'm sorry, Renee. I didn't know until yesterday. The violation hit me like a physical blow. All these years thinking I had successfully escaped when they had been watching from a distance. What else did they know? Had they seen Lily? The thought made me feel ill. Renee, Andrew said hesitantly, I know this is a lot to ask, but would you consider coming to Michigan? Dad's asking for you, and I think he wants to make amends before it's too late. The question hung between us, impossible and unavoidable. Could I face the man who had abandoned me at a train station as a joke? Did I want to hear whatever justifications or apologies he might offer? Would seeing him again undo years of healing? I need time to think. I finally said, my voice tight. I can't promise anything, Andrew. I understand, he replied quickly. Just, please let me know what you decide. And Renee, regardless of what you choose about Dad, I'd like to have my sister back in my life, if that's something you might want too. After we hung up, I sat in the dark of my office for a long time, the past and present colliding in ways I had never anticipated. The 12-year-old girl at the train station and the 32-year-old woman with a family of her own were both part of me, both needing different things. The decision ahead felt impossible to open the door to the past or to keep it firmly shut. Either way, I knew the 29 missed calls had already changed something fundamental. The careful separation I had maintained between my two lives was crumbling, and I would need to find a new way forward through the rubble. The week following Andrew's calls became a process of careful deliberation. Each day I weighed the question, should I see my dying father? The counselor in me recognized the potential value of closure. The wounded child in me recoiled at the thought of facing him again. I doubled my therapy sessions with Dr. Marshall, working through the complex emotions stirred up by this unexpected collision with my past. There's no right answer here, Dr. Marshall reminded me during one particularly difficult session. Whatever you decide needs to be for your healing, not for anyone else's comfort or closure. James was my rock throughout the process, listening without judgment and supporting whatever decision I might make. I'll go with you if you want to see him, he offered. Or I'll help you draft a letter if you'd rather not go in person. Or I'll change our phone numbers and we can move to Australia if that's what you need. That last option made me laugh, despite everything reminding me that I wasn't that helpless child anymore. I had choices now and people who put my well-being first. After days of reflection, I made my decision I would meet with Andrew first in person on neutral ground. I would not rush to my father's bedside out of guilt or obligation. Any further decisions would depend on that initial meeting with my brother. Andrew flew to Ohio the following weekend. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe halfway between the airport and my home. I arrived early, selecting a corner table where I could see the door, an old habit from years of hypervigilance. When Andrew walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. The skinny 8-year-old had grown into a tall man with our father's build but gentler eyes. He hesitated at the entrance, scanning the room until our gazes met. The moment of recognition was electric. 20 years dissolved in an instant. "Renee," he said simply as he approached the table. I stood unsure of the protocol for greeting a brother who was simultaneously a stranger and the only person alive who shared my childhood. He solved the dilemma by offering a tentative hug, which I returned after only a moment's hesitation. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said as we sat down. "I know this can't be easy." "It's surreal," I admitted. "The last time I saw you, you were missing your front teeth." He smiled at that. "And now I have a receding hairline. Time is cruel." The small joke broke some of the tension, and we ordered coffee. The conversation started awkwardly, but gradually found a rhythm as Andrew shared more about his life and family. He showed me pictures of his children on his phone, Jacob with his serious expression and Emma with her mischievous smile. "They look like happy kids," I observed. "That's my primary goal as a parent," Andrew said, his expression growing serious. "To make sure they feel safe and loved always. Laura and I both came from difficult families, so we're very intentional about breaking those cycles." I found myself sharing more about Lily, about my work with traumatized children, about the life I had built from the ashes of our shared past. As we talked, I began to see that Andrew had done his own healing work, had confronted the legacy of our parents in his own way. Eventually, the conversation turned to our father. "He's stabilized," Andrew explained. "They're talking about discharge next week if he continues improving. The heart attack was severe. He'll need significant lifestyle changes and ongoing care." "What kind of man is he now?" I asked, the question that had been hovering beneath the surface of our conversation. Andrew considered this carefully. "He's mellowed, I suppose. The divorce changed him. Mom got most of their friends in the split. and I think the social isolation forced him to do some reflection. His new wife Sandra doesn't put up with the kind of behavior Mom enabled. He's still controlling in many ways, still has that edge, but the outright cruelty seems to have faded. Has he ever acknowledged what they did to us? The lessons? Not directly, Andrew admitted. There have been moments where he's made comments like, "I was too hard on you kids," or "parenting was different back then," but a full acknowledgement, no. I nodded, having expected as much. And Mom? You mentioned she had me tracked. Andrew's expression darkened. That was her project, not his. After you left and never came back, I think it became an obsession for her, knowing where you were even if she wouldn't reach out. It was her way of maintaining some illusion of control. The thought still made my skin crawl, but I pushed past it. Andrew, I've given this a lot of thought. I'm not going to visit Dad in the hospital. He nodded, disappointment visible but resignation stronger. I understand. But, I continued, I would like to write him a letter. Would you give it to him? Of course, he said immediately. Anything you want to say, I'll make sure he gets it. That night, after Andrew had returned to his hotel with plans to fly back to Michigan the next day, I sat at my desk and began the hardest letter I'd ever written. Dear Dad, it began. I won't be coming to see you, but I wanted you to know why. Over 5 pages, I detailed the impact of his lessons, the anxiety, the hypervigilance, the years of therapy, the difficulty trusting people. I explained how the train station incident had been the breaking point, how it had shown me that my safety would always be secondary to his need to control and punish. I've built a good life, I wrote toward the end. I have a husband who would never dream of hurting me to teach me a lesson. I have a daughter I'm raising to know that mistakes are opportunities for growth, not excuses for cruelty. I help children who have experienced trauma similar to what I experienced in your home. I don't write this to hurt you or to exact revenge. I write it because the truth deserves to be spoken at least once between us. What you and Mom called teaching was abuse. It wasn't normal, it wasn't effective, and it wasn't love. I forgive you not because you've earned it, but because carrying anger hurts me more than it hurts you. This forgiveness doesn't mean I want you in my life. It means I'm releasing myself from the power that anger has held over me. I wish you healing from your heart attack. I hope in whatever time you have left you find peace and perhaps greater understanding of the harm your actions caused. Andrew tells me you've mellowed with age. I hope that's true. Goodbye, Dad. Renee. I sealed the letter and gave it to Andrew the next morning when he stopped by to say goodbye. We exchanged contact information and made tentative plans for him to bring his family to visit in the summer. The future possibility of a relationship with my brother felt like an unexpected gift amid the turmoil. A week later, Andrew called to tell me our father had read my letter. He had sat silently afterward, folded it carefully, and placed it in his bedside drawer without comment. 3 days later, he suffered a second, more massive heart attack and passed away before Andrew could reach the hospital. I felt a complex swirl of emotions at the news. Not grief exactly, but a strange sense of finality. I had said what needed to be said. Whether he had taken it to heart or dismissed it, I had reclaimed my voice and my truth. After the funeral, which I did not attend, Andrew came to see me again. We sat in my backyard watching Lily play on her swing set. He kept your letter in his wallet, Andrew told me quietly. They found it when they were gathering his personal effects. I thought you should know that. It was a small thing, perhaps meaningless, perhaps significant. I chose to take it as a sign that my words had reached him in some way, even if he had never found the courage to respond. Over the following months, Andrew and I built a careful relationship. Weekly phone calls, shared photos, eventually a visit where Lily met her cousins for the first time, the children forming an immediate bond that made both Andrew and me tearful. My mother made one attempt to contact me after my father's funeral. I declined the call and asked Andrew to tell her I wasn't ready. Perhaps someday I would be, but not yet. My healing journey was ongoing, and I needed to protect the peace I had fought so hard to achieve. The train station had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I had transformed that abandonment into the determination never to abandon others, not my clients, not my family, and not myself. The scared 12-year-old girl was now part of my story, but she was no longer alone and afraid. She had grown into a woman who knew how to find her way home, not to the place she had left, but to the place she had created with love and intention. In my work with traumatized children, I often tell them that healing isn't about forgetting the painful parts of our story. It's about integrating them into a larger narrative, where they no longer have the power to determine our worth or future. That day at Union Station was just one chapter in my story, not the entire book. 20 years after I walked away from a family that had treated me as disposable, I found myself surrounded by people who treated me as essential: my husband, my daughter, my friends, my brother and his family, and the clients who trusted me with their own healing journeys. Through them, I had discovered the most powerful lesson of all. True family is built on love and respect, not fear and control. Have you ever had to walk away from something familiar, even if painful, to build something better? Share your story in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and healing. And remember, it's never too late to find your way to a place that feels like home. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the strength to write your own happy ending, whatever challenges you face.